Raj, a few ways to try and interpret this initially here. Obviously, we've been talking about the significance of the first female CEO of one of the money center banks. Also, in a sense, it's a transition from, to some degree, the global financial crisis era leadership at Citi. I mean, Goldman made this pivot as well, but you still have a lot of other CEOs out there that kind of date back to that phase. What are your initial takeaways culturally and strategically for Citi?
Well, I think culturally and strategically, this announcement assures a smooth transition. You have Mike, and I agree with the comments just made, who has just an outstanding record, but he signaled for some time that he was nearing the end of his term. Jane was at least apparent successor when she became president. And I'm sure that Citi, like other institutions, go through a very searching process. So I think the idea of doing this transition in this way is critical. Obviously, it is, I guess you could call it groundbreaking as opposed to glass ceiling breaking for the first woman to be the CEO of a major bank in the United States. But having worked with and known Jane for a long time, she would have been in my view, the obvious CEO, whether she were a man or a woman. She's just an incredibly talented person. And I think, again, strategically, what you see is that she has had experience in all phases of Citi over the years. I remember the first time being introduced to her, which is a long time ago, and one of the executives saying, this is the real up-and-comer in the organization. This is 13 years ago, and it was not the upcoming woman. It was the upcoming, the really up-and-coming individual in the organization.
Well, having known her over that period of time, what would you expect to be her priorities in terms of, not to say reorienting Citi, but what would be the areas of emphasis? She obviously has experience, not just more recently in the global consumer bank, but also on the institutional side of things earlier.
Right. So I think she will remain committed to the global strategy, which, if you look at the numbers, it seems to me has paid off. She will clearly continue with what she is doing now to deal with the fallout of COVID-19. She will, in a highly regulated world, have as a high priority working with the regulators. And so, I think Mike has left this in a good place. Citi was not in a good place when he took over in 2012. He has left Jane in a good place, and I suspect she will try to build on what he has done.
Raj, to that point, there is a pretty well-known phenomenon called the glass cliff, where companies tend to promote women during times of crisis. Obviously, we don't really have a clear view of how the whole pandemic will play out, what it will mean for the economy. What kinds of challenges do you think Jane is looking at in front of her in order to avoid that very famous phenomenon known as the glass cliff?
That's a good term. I think the fortunate part for Jane is she's been head of the COVID-19 response. So I think it begins, certainly, and is most fundamentally a question of credit and making sure the credit is strong, or as strong as it can be in the environment. Every bank has to work its way through the impact of the negative interest environment. But it really is credit. If credit stays relatively sound, there's a lot of room here. And then she will have to work, as I think every bank CEO will, with the challenges that are coming from competition outside the banking industry.
What about the challenges that you might see coming potentially on the regulatory side of things? This is not unique to Citi, certainly, but the idea perhaps out there, if there is a change in administration this fall, is that going to be something that the banks are going to have to navigate?
think every bank has to consider. We have not really seen major changes in the past unless the banks can be held directly responsible for the problems. So after the financial crisis in 2008, there was obviously major regulatory reform because banks were held responsible. Back in 1933, the same situation. You can never tell in advance. You don't know whether the Fed would turn over, how quickly. But right now, I would not see a major change in the fundamental structure. Could you tweak here? Could you tweak there? Inevitably. But a change in the fundamental structure does not seem to make sense when banks have done as much as they have to help support the economy during COVID-19.